Hey, there we are. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Code Noobs weekly live stream. Good morning, guys. How you guys doing this morning?
Doing
Randall,
well.
Doing
Danny.
fantastic.
Nice. Me too. I got my coffee in hand. It is March 2nd at 9 a.m. In case you guys didn't know that, uh, just like every Saturday, we're here at 9 a.m. consistent. And I think, let's just
We are
let's just
consistent
get
about that.
right into the theme today because I think that just that intro just made it, right? Our theme today is
Totally.
having responsibility as a developer. And part of that is us showing up every day for you guys. Doesn't that feel good that you just know we're here every single week, no matter what? We're here at 9 a.m. to talk to you guys.
You know what's really interesting that you say about that? So there was
What's
this
that?
book that I read called What Americans Want. And
Mm,
actually, the number one thing that people want is reliability because they
yeah,
can't trust anything anymore. They can't trust
it's
the
true.
government. They can't trust anything. They just want something to be reliable, to be there when they expect it to be there.
Well, it
Yeah,
makes sense though.
so
Most
true.
people, yeah, we want that comfort of that security of knowing that things are going to be the same the next day, And I think there isn't a lot of that anymore. Like you see this all over where like nothing seems to have sort of the worth or like the consistency it used to have, I guess. And that's
Yeah,
big one.
totally. So I guess to get into it, let me ask you guys, like, what does responsibility mean to you as a developer? Right? Because I think there's a lot of interpretations of what being responsible or responsibility could mean. You got something, Randall. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
I got something. I think it comes down to personal responsibility. Like that's a big thing for me because a lot of people want to be like, well, the government doesn't do this and my employer doesn't do that and point fingers all over the world. But
Mm,
really, for me, at least, it comes down to personal responsibility because I'm just going to take care of the things that are within my control and make sure I'm doing them to the best of my ability. And
yeah.
then the rest of the world can take care of itself because I have no control over that anyways.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's a good point. Like, and also knowing what you can and cannot control. Right. I think that's a
Oh,
huge one.
God. Oh yeah, dude, knowing what's within your control is huge. And I think like also recognizing that like, yeah, within your control is like your response to things, your attitude, like how
Yeah.
you approach problems, all of that, like your ability to learn anything. So I think I would like I always think of it too as like personal responsibility and ownership.
Hmm.
Like recognizing like that this is part of like I'm creating something, so I have ownership over this. I can't control
Yeah.
everything. If it's a large project, right? I'm not responsible for everything, but being responsible for what is within my control and what I'm actually producing and putting out there in the world.
Yeah. That's awesome. I was going to say, like, my interpretation is a lot. I mean, basically what you both said, but in terms of ownership, right? Because like taking ownership for your future as a developer is huge because it is a
Yeah.
highly competitive field, right? And the only way that you can stand out is by taking ownership of what you mean as a developer in this huge world of tech. So I agree with both of you guys, right? Having responsibility of your own work, of what you're putting out there, and how you're taking ownership of that work. I think one of the things that a lot of developers struggle with in the beginning is feeling like they did something wrong at some point, right? It's very difficult to admit wrongness. And I think that's a huge factor in ownership. And that actually makes you look way better to a hiring manager, to a company, is that you can very easily say, hey, I messed up. I'm taking ownership and I will make this better. I think most companies and most people would rather somebody who takes ownership than tries to point a finger because pointing a finger doesn't solve anything, right? But taking ownership does. It's somebody who's like, hey, I'm ready to take ownership of that and I'll be better. And people are more willing to work with you if you take ownership and responsibility of your own work. So I think
Yeah.
that's huge. Can you guys give
You
me
you make a
ahead?
great point with the whole blame culture versus like supportive
Oh
culture because
God.
I actually recently I went to a cybersecurity conference and they were taking a look at the commercial flying industry because
Okay.
since
Mm,
1980 it has become insanely safe.
yeah.
Okay? It's like I think last year there were like 3 flights out of hundreds of millions that had
Yeah.
accidents or fatalities. And that's like, it's like negligible. It's one of the safest things you could possibly do. But they're like, how did this happen? And it's because there was a paper published in the 1980s called Human Error. And it talked about blame culture versus a just culture, which is exactly what you mentioned. where the blame
Yeah.
culture is everybody's like, well, this went wrong and this went wrong and this went wrong. And everybody was afraid of stepping forward and being like, I made a mistake. How can we fix this? To all of a sudden being changing to, you know what? If you made a mistake, it's not your fault. You were just one thing in the cog that caused that to happen. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that causes as well. So let's try and figure out what happened so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I think that's a really cool point because you sort of mentioned this cog, right? Like accidents and failures don't happen in isolation. There's usually more than one person who has their hand in it. And the blame culture of like pointing a finger basically means that nobody stops to fix it, right? In this cog, like in there's all these gears in the cog, right? And all these people could have stopped it if they had just taken ownership, but everybody's just pointing a finger at the next. And then all of a sudden you have this huge, massive failure. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead,
Can I
Danny.
add something too? I think, and I think this, I've seen this a lot, especially being in colleges for so long. But like, I think we've also gotten to a point now where like, because schools have gotten so expensive and stuff, people think like, I get this degree, I go to this boot camp, and then I get a job. And they see it as a causal relationship without taking any ownership. So then when they don't
Yeah,
get the job, they get mad that like, oh, well, the school sucked or this sucked or, whatever. And the reality is, it's like, well, yeah, you might have gotten the paper, but you still have to take ownership of doing all the other stuff above and
yeah,
beyond that that makes you stand out as an individual that's worthy of being hired. And I think we forget that too. Like if you're looking to work for someone, it's just like you said, you have to stand out, man. There's a lot of people in I don't care what field it is. There's a ton of people in every field. It doesn't matter which one it is. And tech is no different, So you got to stand out and you have to take ownership of that too.
yeah. And I assure you that like many boot camps do suck in many ways,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
but many people do get jobs. And it's not because they have some different experience in the boot camp. It's actually their experience outside the boot camp. They choose to become a developer and take ownership of what their future holds for them. And I think that's huge. Like I really agree with you. I think so many people go into a boot camp and they're sold that way too, with this expectation of like, you're guaranteed a job after this, and we do that in our program too, but here's the difference is that we support you in that, in your accountability and ownership, whereas a lot of boot camps are just like, yeah, you know they actually don't guarantee anything. Most of them just tell you like, we have a percentage, which is a
Which is
manipulative
generally a
number.
lie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's a high percentage of people who end up getting a job. They don't tell you what that job is. I remember actually hearing about some boot camps where they were like, they have a sort of guarantee, but then if you look at the fine print, it's like, um, we're gonna give you we're gonna make sure that you're placed in a job, but it's like a $20,000 a year job, and they like have these connections with companies that will hire developers at super. And if you don't agree to that job, then you lose the guarantee. So
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Russ, because we actually do have a pretty insane guarantee
we
that
do,
you would almost have to be nuts to not take us up on this, is that
yeah,
we will get you to be a paid developer within a year, or you can keep working with us for free until you do, which is
yeah,
a
which
pretty
is
insane guarantee. Like you would have to be nuts to not take that. And if you do want to take that, you could head over to codenoobs.io/mentoring and check it out for
absolutely, yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, I mean that's like, I wish we had that, because I would feel so much more comfortable in joining a boot camp or joining any sort of program if I knew that that was, what I was getting. And I think for most people that's your goal, right? It's not like I just want to learn how to code. It's like you want to be able to do something with that. And part of what we teach too inside of that program is how to start earning money while you're learning, because that's like a very real possibility, right? It happens to a lot of people, and it's very
We
easy
all
to,
did it.
to go
I
out
mean,
and actually get work while you're learning. And that even pays for like the opportunity to work with us. So anyway, back to the point is, I have a pretty, are you want to say something, Randall? You got something on your
No, go
mind?
for it. Go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, I have a pretty good example of responsibility that actually happened to me this week. And I think it's a sort of good way to outline what it means to be responsible as a developer. So, I had a friend of mine, Drew, who's been on the show before, and he, referred me. Number one, he asked for a portfolio, which I gave him, and he was like blown away by my portfolio because I've taken the responsibility to make a stunning portfolio, which goes very far. I think a lot of people don't focus on how much Go ahead. You
which
got
is
something?
one we will help anybody in our
Yes,
incubator create for themselves. And we
absolutely.
will
We
walk
help
you
you
through
build
step for
your
step.
own. Yeah, we help you build your own beautiful portfolio so that when people ask you, because they will, you have something to share with them. So I shared my portfolio with Drew, and he was like, "Whoa, this is like really good." He's like, "Thank you." And he shared it with this company, Bit Basil, who's like popular, in the crypto scene. And they needed me to just build like a few small components, right? It was literally like two or three little cards that they needed for a website. And so I agreed because I wanted the experience working with, a well-known company like Bit Basil, and really just getting my foot in the door. It was a paid opportunity too, so made money on it as well. Um, and so I didn't look at the code before I agreed. I was like, yeah, I'll do it, whatever. Like I assumed it was like decent, whatever. It was using Next.js, so I made this assumption, and that's on me, right? I assume that it was quality code because it's using a new framework. Well, then I, get hired to do this work, and then the code gets handed to me, and it is a dumpster fire and a half. It was like the biggest piece of crap thing I have ever seen in my entire life. It was using a version of Next that is two full versions behind. It had like all these different APIs running in the background. Basically, it took 5 minutes, and I'm not exaggerating. I timed it 5 minutes to spin up the site the first time. And anytime that you clicked on anything or loaded a new page, it also took 5 minutes to load up. It was mind blowing. And I was like, what is going on with this? And I basically told Drew and I told, the people at Bit Basil, I was like, look, I want to do this. I don't normally like do this, but it is literally impossible for me to create this in your timeline. So I would rather literally rebuild the whole site for you because it was a proof of concept site. And you may actually see the site. There's a post inside the Facebook group if you guys want to check it out. It's a pretty sweet site, but I built the whole thing on my own, and I did it. I didn't ask for more money or anything like that because I took responsibility. I was like, you know what? This is literally what you have is trash, and it's going to take me longer to put in two components in this than it is for me to rebuild the whole site. I want the experience. I want to make sure that you know that I stand behind my work. And so I rebuilt literally the whole site from scratch. I spun up a new Next project, and I rebuilt everything, the homepage, all the components, as well as like dummy. It's a proof of concept. So the idea is like you can see how it works. So I built all the dummy data, all that stuff. And then guess what happened? I delivered it to them, and immediately they hired me back immediately to build more of the project. And that's
Yeah.
what responsibility means, right? It means that you care about your work first. It's not about the money or about like notoriety or anything like that. It's about I care that my work is good, and I don't want to put my name on a project that is a complete dumpster fire, right? And
No, when you
they respected that. And I'll tell you what too, like
yeah.
last point before I let you go, Danny, because I know you're
No, go
like
ahead. Yeah.
trying to jump in here. But part of delivering a project to a client is that they're going to find things that they don't like in it, right? They may say like, "Oh, because you're going off a wireframe which doesn't give you all of the information that you need sometimes to
Yeah.
develop like how do things interact when I hover over them, or how do these things stack up in mobile view or things like that, right? And so when you deliver something to a client, they're inevitably, wow, I can't even say that. They're going to tell you, hey, I don't like this part. I want, this part or whatever. And part of having responsibility is saying, cool, like I'm totally happy to change that for you. And that's what I did, right? Like it's going to happen that things won't be perfect, right? And so that's our job as a developer, is to be responsible and say, cool, I totally understand. Let's make it right. And you do the work for them. And they respect that so much. I guarantee that. I mean, number one, they already hired me back to do more work. So I already made like basically double what I did when I signed on. And two, when they actually go to build the site, because this is a proof of concept, right? When they actually go to build it, who do you think is the first person they're going to contact when they need somebody? It's going to be me, because they
Yeah.
know my quality of work and they know what they get for the money that they pay. And I can probably even charge them more in the future because they know what they're getting and that it works and that it's quality. So I think that's a pretty good example of what it means to be responsible as a developer. All right, Danny, I'll let you go
No,
now.
I was gonna say it is a good example too because it also shows like it's a proof of concept. Like if that went out as it originally was, it would have been just a mess
Oh,
because it
they would
wouldn't have
have never
worked.
got
It
funding.
would have taken, yeah, they would
Yeah.
have never gotten anything. So you not only did you save them, but you also like I think what people forget is when we take ownership, we just keep creating opportunities. Like you
Yeah.
said, you didn't charge them more. You might not have made a ton of money right then, but you did it on the faith that those opportunities were going to be created, which is you make a good, give a good impression of yourself, you show what you're able to do, and boom, all the other developers become meaningless to them now because,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
showed you can actually do it.
yeah, and
Like,
like they are probably I could only imagine that right now they're like, man, how lucky are we? We just found this like baller developer who built this whole site from scratch and did it in like under 2 days. Like literally built the whole thing again in under 2 days of work,
yeah,
which they were on a timeline too, because they were going to ETH Denver and needed it done. So they lucked out hardcore, and I'm sure they know that. Go ahead, Randall.
yeah,
So like one thing that's very related that you'll find out, and I'm not saying you because you already know this, Russ, but a lot of people who may be listening right now will find out is there's certain countries where people historically have gone to find uh, inexpensive developers.
Hmm.
And those countries have developed a very poor reputation because they'll say, yes, we can do any work, and then they
Yeah,
deliver what was delivered
dumpster
before,
fire.
yeah, before you
yeah,
got your hands on it. And so
Yeah,
like for a while it went over okay because you can pull the rug over on people for so long. But nowadays,
yeah,
anywhere you go, literally like any developer worth their salt is like, oh no, we will not work with people from there because they don't they don't deliver.
yeah.
yeah,
No, it's totally true. I mean, I hear that all the time, and that's why, at like, I don't think it's specific. It tends to be like certain countries, but I think at the end of the day, it really matters like the developer themselves and building a
oh yeah,
reputation for yourself around having responsibility and delivering quality work means that you can charge more too, right?
yeah,
Because everybody is like, I think there's this like maybe in the past, not as much now, but I guess maybe now too. Like a lot of people just want the cheapest possible work, right? And that's why I think there's like huge tech layoffs is because every company just wants to be cheap. But the reality is, where do you think most, Fortune 500 companies go to get their developers? Is not the countries that you were talking about. It's mostly the US. And the reason
mhm,
why is that the people in the US have responsibility with their work, stand behind what they do, and they take pride in it, and they're constantly like becoming better developers. So what are you gonna say?
So I'm glad that you brought that up about the tech layoffs because that's something that, whenever people are like, they're like, I want to become a developer, but there's all these tech layoffs. Like, I don't know if I'll get a job. And all three of us have gotten hired
Literally,
amidst, have
while every
learned.
company was firing
yeah,
everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
like it's not hard if you're skilled and if you take responsibility. But one thing that I wanted to touch on was I recently read the new Elon Musk biography, and he was talking about what he did at Twitter. And while he may get flack because people think he fired everybody at Twitter, basically all that he said to them was, well, up until he started working there, they all had remote work agreements where they could work flex time whenever they wanted, and they
Mhm.
had way more people than they actually needed. So he
Yeah,
got in there and he realized that there was way too many people doing nothing. And he said, okay, from now on, we're going to work very hard to build this to be the best company it possibly can. Anybody who's not on board can leave. So, like anybody who's not responsible for progressing the vision of the company, you can leave. And that's how that's the tech layoffs. It's just people not being responsible for the
yeah.
company they're working for.
And that just shows you the caliber of developer too, right? Because instead of taking on a challenge, they decided to take the easy way out and just get the severance package and be like, okay, see you later.
Mm-hmm.
There's such an and all these people, like all these new developers, want this opportunity to work for huge companies like Twitter and work for Elon Musk. And that's 90% of your success with doing that is going to be responsibility. If you're willing to be responsible, and sometimes that means as a new developer, not, you know, asking for the highest pay out of anyone because you have to be responsible about your skill set as well. Like if you are not the best developer, your pay should be fair value of that as well, right? And as you challenge yourself as a developer and take on more responsibility, you can require more pay, right? And people will happily pay it because they know the value that you bring to the table. And I think that's a huge point, Randall.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andy.
I'm gonna give an example too. I think especially ownership comes in really important when you're doing freelance work too, and just being honest too with what you were just saying with what you can do. Because like I
Yeah.
had an experience where I was working for a client and like they had gotten rid of the person that was doing their management of their basically their server. So they had no one to like I thought originally going into this, they had somebody to actually put this thing into production where I
Mhm.
wasn't going to have to deal with that. And then he told me much later, he was like, look, we don't have that guy that does it anymore. Can you do it? And I was like, and I was honest with him. I was like, look, that's not my area. I was like, sure I can figure it out, but it's going to take me
Yeah.
longer and it's going to
Yeah.
cost you a little more. And they were fine with that. They had no problem with that. And I got it done. I did what I said. But it's just being honest too with people, I think, and straightforward and telling them because stuff like you said never works out like you think it's going to. And never, there's always going
Yeah.
to be mistakes, there's always going to be problems. But honesty goes a long way, and ownership, I think, especially when you're doing freelance too, is so important because your clients just see that you care
Yeah.
and that you're reachable and that you can explain the situation and that you're gonna, deliver what you actually said you're gonna deliver.
Yeah. I think that's huge.
Mhm.
I had another sort of point that I wanted to ask you about, Randall, because this is something that comes up a lot. And when we discussed originally this topic of responsibility, this is sort of where my mind went, which is on the development side, right? So as a developer, you have a responsibility to the client and also the users of a web app, right? And there's 2 points to me that really I think come up. One of them is security, right? Because a lot of times as developers, we just want to deliver stuff as quick as possible, and so we don't.
Plain text.
Yeah, plain text
Mhm.
passwords. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't always prioritize security and also ethics, right? Like how does your web app affect different people, right? Because you know, I was reading this book on about Google software development recently, and they talk a lot about this of like how your app can affect certain people in like certain countries or socioeconomic statuses differently, right? And so we have an ethical responsibility as developers to consider these things, and also like you can see this in a lot of things that like have been developed in the past, right? Typically, you know, Silicon Valley developers have been like white men, right? And so a lot of technology is built for white men, but it doesn't represent all of, humanity. Like, and you can see this in things like, AI generation and, um, photo apps and things like that, where they just aren't accounting for people of, different races, cultures, things like that. So, I really wanted to ask you, like, how do you feel about security and the responsibility of a developer for security? And then we can talk sort of about ethics as well. I mean,
Yeah.
Danny
So,
could probably talk about ethics a bunch too.
oh yeah. So, I think the first important thing to remember is that we live in a capitalistic society. So
Yeah.
we worship the altar of money. So before safety, before well-being, before goodness for humanity, what it all comes down to is dollar and cents. And
Mhm.
so it's you have to look at where people are incentivized and where businesses are incentivized. And so businesses are incentivized to make the most money as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
in doing that, how they do that is they come up with a vision and then deliver on it as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
one thing that's becoming used more often now, but even in itself has a bunch of security holes, is DevOps. So DevOps is very popular. You also sometimes hear like DevSecOps.
Hmm.
And if you're interested, there's a book called, I think, The Unicorn Project and the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project that talks about this topic. And so basically, because there's developers who create the software,
Hmm.
or the apps or the websites. And then there's testers who test it. And then there's basically the people who are responsible for putting it into production. And
Yep.
then there's the end users. And so, but oftentimes what happens is it gets behind in development and it gets so far behind in development and they already gave a date that they have to put it into
Yeah.
production. So what
Yeah.
gets squeezed is the testing. So no
Yeah.
testing gets done on the software, and they're like, well, we'll just do end user testing. We'll have beta testing, stuff like that. But
Yeah.
there's no security testing. None of that gets done whatsoever. And because of that, a lot of things get out there where they have vulnerabilities. And the one of the most unfortunate things about that is when it discloses data. So like
Yeah.
you hear about a lot of these companies. I think it was well, I mean, they're basically
There's tons of them.
passwords, social
Yeah.
security numbers, emails, all this stuff gets dumped. And then what happens, how it affects everyone. And most people are like, yeah, but I don't share passwords with anybody. It's like, it's not up to you because as soon as you entered your password on whatever website and they got breached and all of their
Yeah.
usernames and passwords are out there, they just test those username and passwords on every popular site. And if you
Yeah.
reuse a password, then you're done. And so it's
Yeah.
it's kind of simple as that. So I think it comes down to incentives. And unfortunately, see, like security on nobody likes security because security is on the opposite end of the spectrum from usability. If you want something
Yeah.
that's super usable, there's no security. But if you
Yeah.
want something that's secure, it's not usable. It's air gapped, it's behind lock and key. Nobody can touch it, nobody can look at it, 100% secure. So like
Yeah.
you have to try and find a middle, and that's what they're trying to do with DevOps and DevSecOps. But it's a challenge because the security people are just, they're mindset of prison guards, they forget that they also have to figure out how to make the company money.
Yeah. I have a comment about that, and I'm not going to reveal the name of the company because for security purposes, but I was doing work recently for a company, helping them build an MVP, which is like a minimum viable product, if anyone doesn't know that terminology. And basically, what that means is like a product that they can take to investors and say, "Hey, we want to raise money. This is what it is." It wasn't BitBasil, by the way.
I
Um,
know.
yeah. So recently, they had somebody come in.
Maybe I don't know. I wouldn't share this on here.
You
If
wouldn't
it's
share it.
if it no, if it's like a
It's
security thing, I just wouldn't
it's
share
not
it.
it's not really like there's no it's literally it's still in production. There's no real user data, so it doesn't matter. So
Okay.
anyway, um so part of building that project was my responsibility was to build an MVP, right? Which is like a minimum viable product, something that they could take to investors and show them the product and whatever. And so part of that was I was building it using Firebase, which is Google's sort of back end as a service, which is it's developed by Google, literally, right? And so they had
Pretty big company.
yeah, pretty big
Yeah.
company that knows security pretty well, I would say. And so they had a developer come in and they were critiquing my work and they were like, "Oh, the security is not great and whatever." And I was like, "Yeah, we're building a minimum viable product. It's not built for security." And his interest was in rebuilding a database on his own and with his team. And I was like talking to my colleagues and I was like, "Okay, I get why he would argue this because if I were a developer coming into a company like trying to get hired, I would probably critique some of their work just so that they feel like I'm an authority. But at the same time, I was like, that's crazy because this person's literally saying that they know security and can handle security better with a 3 to 4 person team than like all of Google. Right. And so I think that's something to consider, particularly as you're a junior developer, is leaning if you're going to bring something to production or bring something where people are going to be able to use your app, leaning into some of these services that are more well known, even like, OAuth and things like that for security because they're established. Like you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's something that as developers we're encouraged to do. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Right. And for security purposes, like, you want something that's protecting your users because at the end of the day, if there's a breach, there's a payout that goes to users. Usually there's a lawsuit around that. And also you're going to lose users because they know that, your app is not secure. So just think
Well,
about these things. Go ahead, Danny.
yeah, to that point, I just want to say something with respect to the ethics. Like, and I think that's a good example too, where, you know, as a new developer, leaning into these things that you can use that are more secure, that you know are secure, because it's hard. Like writing an auth that's secure is hard.
Very
When,
difficult. Yeah.
especially, yeah, dude, especially when you're new, it's confusing. There's a lot of room for mistakes. So
Yeah.
yeah, using like OAuth provided by one of these backend services is
Mm-hmm.
great. You know your clients don't have to worry about it and you take ownership of it because you can be secure in knowing that this other thing is providing that for you.
Yeah, because
And,
they're taking ownership of it,
yeah,
right? They're taking
exactly.
ownership, so you inherently have their ownership of that as well.
And it's not like you're using a package either that's used by two people. You're talking about Firebase is used by tons of big companies,
By
tons of,
massive Fortune
yeah,
500 companies on a regular basis. Yeah. And
yeah. And I think that protects you a lot. And on the other side, that taking ownership of the ethics thing, I think, we can only do so much. And I think the thing is just trying, it's hard to, see the world from everybody's perspective and think of everything. But the best is just trying to do your best to take that into account. Like we talk about all the time, like, designing website sites for responsiveness means mobile first. Most people use their phone for the internet. Knowing that ahead of time helps you design so that everybody can use your app in a way that it works well, it's effective. And then thinking about like accessibility, right? Taking ownership of that, making sure the screen readers can actively like, access and make sense of your web page or your web app. And that way, you're making sure that all users can kind of access it and, interact with what you're making. And I think that's important on
yeah, I
that
think
side.
that's important. Cool. Any closing remarks, Randall?
Yeah, so we talked earlier about our no-brainer guarantee, where we will help you become a paid developer within a year, or you can keep working for us with us for free
Or
until
for
you
us?
do become, yeah,
Yeah.
until you do become a paid
That too.
developer. If you want to check that out, codenoobs.io/mentoring. And I did want to note that we are starting our CSS intensive module. So if
Yes.
that's an area that you're looking for help with, particularly with hands-on from 3 experienced developers, then it might be in your best interest to just suck it up and join now, because you're not going to find a better guarantee than that anywhere in the whole entire coding space. So again, codenoobs.io/mentoring.
Yeah, I talked to somebody who was interested this week, and he was sort of like on the fence. And I was like, look, dude, you're literally getting the opportunity to learn all the code, have accountability, have 3 live mentors who work hand in hand with you. And it's like less than a bar tab, like literally less than like your single bar tab. So skip the bar on Saturday and land a job this year. Like that's literally what we're offering people. So I don't know if you don't want to take up that offer, you're kind of I don't think you're taking your you know role as a developer very seriously. I think you're sort of just like it's a
Hey,
hobby, not like
You could say you're not being very responsible.
you're
Way to
not
bring it
being
around.
very
well,
responsible.
on
Exactly.
that final note, I think, education has always been that way. You get in what you get out of it what you put into it. And that's taking
Absolutely.
ownership, right? So I think, it fits very well with this topic of responsibility that, if you want to be a developer, dude, you got to take ownership of yourself too and do it and do the right things to, get there.
Yeah. Like I mean you said it too before. Like Elon Musk is not hiring developers who value a bar tab more than their own education and progress as a developer. So
Yeah.
Yeah, he was crazy. He would go into his companies in the middle of the night, and if nobody was working there, he would fire everyone.
yeah, and it makes sense, right?
Like
Like
that's
look at
nuts.
it, it's not like we say that is like, oh my God, that's so crazy. But then you're literally talking about like the wealthiest person in the world or one of the wealthiest people in the world. It's not a surprise that he got there. He's doing things that other people don't do because they actually work. And so if you want to be a developer that gets opportunities that other developers don't do, don't just do the same crap, right? Like
Yeah.
you're following the trends of people who are not having success. So yeah, so it's on you guys at this point. You got to take responsibility for your own life and your own future as a developer. So with that, thank you guys for another amazing episode, Randall and Danny, and we will see everyone next week at 9 a.m. on Saturday because we're responsible and we're always here. And if you are in our masterclass mentoring, we will see you in about a half hour at 10 a.m. Cool.
Awesome.
Peace. Have a good
Peace.
day, guys.